Hi, Dan here with God Life. I've been reading this great book by John Piper called Future Grace. In chapter 10, John Piper shares about his favorite Bible verse. He writes, "This is the most precious verse in the Bible to me. The promise in it is so all-encompassing that it stands ready to help me at virtually every turn in my life and ministry. There has never been and never will be a circumstance in my life where this promise is irrelevant." So what verse is it? It's Romans 8:32, which says, "He who did not spare his own son, but gave him up for us all, how will he not also with him graciously give us all things?" The verse has two parts, a foundation and a promise. The foundation is, "He who did not spare his own son, but gave him up for us all." And the promise is that he will graciously give us all things. But what are these all things? Health? Safety? A long and successful life? Well, not necessarily. In fact, later in Romans 8, Paul writes, "For your sake we are being killed all the day long." Again, John Piper says, "We are more than conquerors, not by escaping these terrible things, but by watching God turn these enemies of our joy into servants of our good." So, going back to the foundation, he who did not spare his own son, but gave him up for us all. First, we need to understand that it was not the Jews or the Romans who killed Jesus. It was God himself. The Bible says in Acts 2:23 that this man was delivered up by the predetermined plan and foreknowledge of God. And Isaiah 53 says, "We esteemed him stricken, smitten by God. It was the will of the Lord to bruise him. He, that is God the Father, has put him to grief." So Paul's logic here is arguing from the greater to the lesser. Let's say someone is motivated to do two tasks, one a very hard and costly one, and the other an easy one. If he does the hard and costly task, it's a sure thing that he'll also do the easy one. Let me give you an example. Imagine that you need to move something really heavy from one room to another. And while you're standing there trying to figure out how to do this, your best friend shows up, who just happens to be an Olympic weightlifting champion. Moving that heavy thing would be super easy for him, and he would be glad to do it for you. God the Father loved his Son infinitely. Sending his innocent, beloved Son to ridicule, agony, and death was harder than we can imagine. But now that he has done that, graciously giving us all things is easy by comparison. John Piper sums it up like this: "What a truth! Giving us all things is the easy thing. Think about that when you're afraid you'll miss out on something that's good for you. The situation may seem hard or even impossible. But for God, creating the world and running it for the good of his people is a relatively easy thing to do compared to handing over his Son to ridicule and torture. But he did it. And now all of God's provision for us is not only sure, it is easy." I hope you find this encouraging and that you'll dig into Romans chapter 8 to discover for yourself more of God's amazing promises. See you next time on God Life.